Okay, so I am just gonna see if I can get this. I was looking at another little option for sharing so that there, I think this will work. And then you guys can still see me. So, hi there.
Oh
Um,
my gosh.
so I should probably not show you my screen though. Let's not
Oh,
do that. Oh gosh.
you're making us crazy.
I know. Well, I'm a very like visual person, so like I need to see all of those things, but that doesn't mean that anybody else needs to see the nonsense. There, now can you see my
Yes.
slideshow? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so part of, my work in extension is that I get to go out and visit with lots of communities, and it means that kind of like, pollinating lots of different ideas, but figuring out how to collect them all and share them all is part of the journey. So thank you all so much for being there in person. I am filling in for a colleague and am joining you from northern Minnesota. So I appreciate you being flexible with the technology and just know that if I were in person, I would love to visit with you all and meet you all. Um, so I'm really excited to have some time today to just talk a little bit about agritourism. Now, I know we have like very limited amount of time, according to the schedule. And so my hope is that, by prioritizing just some kind of frequent questions that come up, that it will sort of get you thinking so that when we get to that Q&A time, that you're kind of ready with some of those things that are on your mind. So I come to agritourism. Um, as a rural kid where I grew up with huge garden and animals and things, and I grew up doing a lot of like very country things. Um, and I distinctly remember being just shocked when my cousins came to visit from Arizona, and we were out in my grandpa's dairy barn, and he asked if they wanted to learn how to milk a cow. And I just thought that was the strangest thing because it's like, why would you do that by hand? You have perfectly good milking equipment. But lo and behold, they wanted, to learn how to hand milk a cow. And, my aunt, pulls out her camera, and I'm old enough, that camera looked more like this, with the flash bulbs in it. And I distinctly remember as a kid just being so perplexed. Like, why would you bring a camera into the barn? Like, gross, weird. It's not like today where we have, a camera with our cell phone and it's readily accessible all the time. And so years later, here I think I'm going to move to the big city. And what do I find, in living in the city, but that I miss, my country roots. So my husband and I had the opportunity to buy a hobby farm in East Central Minnesota. And what I did not expect from all of that was the fire hose of shoulds that came with that. So I was thinking about it and like there's so many things that people suggested and it has absolutely like shaped my work around agritourism. So I wanted just to share a few things that have come up for me personally in my life of the many things that people have suggested when they like this is actually a picture of our farm and my husband driving a little wagon ride with some of our family. But people suggested that we should host weddings or have overnight guests, barn dances, festivals, private events, fundraisers, farm tours, field trips, graduation photos, all of the above. So what do you think, that people suggested? Any guesses which ones of these people suggested? Hmm?
All of them.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I share that because like I am not here today to tell you what you should be doing on your farm or if you already have one or if you're dreaming big dreams and thinking about what might be possible, what you should do. Instead, what my work has allowed me to do is to be able to bring together different resources to help farmers and business owners and dreamers to really kind of kick around and vet different opportunities and different possibilities that may be a good fit for you. So later on, I'll share with you which things I actually did do. So when I had first bought that farm and was thinking, okay, maybe I should do something with this, uh, and looked around for different resources, it was really hard to find, a central place or central hub for information or resources. And that years later, I took this role and had the opportunity to really help develop um, these resources further. It was really important to me that we have a definition and a working definition. And I was really surprised to find that agritourism is actually an international activity and sector. And it's not even that there's multiple definitions of it, but there's multiple spellings of the term. And depending what part of the world you're in, it's spelled slightly differently. And so I have, for the last 5 years or so, been part of a big statewide group that's really been leading an initiative to define this. So I'm curious, what does agritourism mean to you all? I know it's kind of a small group, so if you want to share that verbally, you can. You can also just reflect individually. But how might you define agritourism? And I know I gave you guys the cheat sheet worksheets there too.
Bringing people to the farm.
Bringing people to the farm? Absolutely. There's so many on-farm visits. Yes. Any others that are kind of top of mind?
I was in Italy last year and we went to a farm where they showed us how they made mozzarella cheese.
Ooh,
Went and and then we had a meal there and we went and saw, vineyards or olive groves.
yes. Yes. So,
Teaching, like I grew up in the cities. I never thought I would have the acreage I have and be growing so much that I grow and having farm animals and stuff. And my sister, she makes fun of me because she's a little older and she's still a city gal up in New York, but she has no idea what the farm, I don't want to say farm mentality, but what it means. When I say I have to bring someone in to trim the goat hooves because I can't do it or milking, you have to make sure you're milking them, on a set schedule. And they have no idea. So it's just sharing the knowledge and how we do things and why. And I mean, we do it because we love it and it makes us happy, but they sometimes are just boggled.
yes. Yes. It really is like a full lifestyle. It's not something that you just clock in and clock out of in many, many cases. Absolutely. So there are so many different definitions and perspectives, and just depending, like your sister probably has a different perspective as you shared. Um, and I often think of it as being really faceted. So just depending, like a cut gemstone, something. So depending on which angle and which perspective you have, you're going to have a different um, maybe working definition or meaning of it. And what's been happening over the last decade or so across the country actually is really this kind of movement toward having some broader understanding of what all is included in agritourism and really bringing together the different elements that are part of it so that we can start to see it as a whole and not just be limited to thinking of just an apple orchard or just a dairy farm, but to be able to look at all of them together. Now, in southern Minnesota, you all have some great examples of agritourism that are happening. This is a photo from the Pleasant Grove Pizza Farm in Waseca, which was featured a couple years ago in the Extension magazine that went out across the state. There's the North Star Farm Tour That's a fiber arts farm tour in southeastern Minnesota. There's Farm America in Waseca, which is more of an activity kind of attraction, but where it's very much, helping people connect with um, agricultural history. And there are undoubtedly others that you all are familiar with as well. Are there some that come to mind in your area?
Mary does a event called Sowing Seeds, which I think could count as agritourism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah, that's just a day event, so like a festival, like you had mentioned before.
Wonderful.
Going to the farm and offering different demonstrations of farming things.
Yes. And that's such a great example because sometimes those agritourism activities are more of a one day out of the whole year, uh, where other things like Farm America are like a full kind of established facility for that kind of activity. So there is a full range. And if you haven't already accessed this, I definitely would encourage you to check out the Minnesota Grown website and Explore Minnesota websites. They both have been part of this statewide group, and because of that work, have really taken amazing steps to building out, having great resources for the public to be able to access agritourism opportunities and activities around the state. Minnesota Grown's directory is membership based. It's a very modest fee. I believe it's $20 or $25 a year in order to be listed on that site. And then Explore Minnesota does have an industry site that allows you to post your activities and events or um, your location if that's where you're hosting people year round. But they both have, great maps and things. So if you're even just kind of trying to scope out, what if I added this kind of activity? You can go there and, see what other people are doing. But for all of these different examples, the definition that we've really landed on and have been working with is thinking about agritourism as where agriculture and tourism meet. And that definition is really important because then it allows for the wide variety of examples that you all brought up to be part of the same conversation. And there are many, many different farms that are doing similar activities, but often they're doing different combinations of similar activities. And so by using this kind of shared umbrella definition, we're able to come together across different activities to be able to share resources and talk about some of the common challenges that are faced when you're bringing, say, for example, bringing the public to your farm. There are some very specific kinds of concerns and challenges that come up with that. Also on here, there's a link, and I will make these slides available for you afterwards, but we've developed a website, and this is the short link for it through the University of Minnesota. But this is really that hub that I had wished for all those years ago, but where you can actually go and find resources around farm safety. You can get connected to some of the specialty crop resources and the tourism development resources that are all available to you. So within this definition, because it's so broad, it's helpful to break it apart into these kind of 5 different categories that most agritourism activities fall under. These include direct sales, so farm stands, you pick. I heard some earlier conversation about the farmers market. That can all be part of it, where you have that interaction between a farmer or producer and tourists that are visiting the community or the region. Education absolutely falls under that. So that can include those school tours, workshops, on-farm classes, and these can be held on or off farm. Hospitality, that includes the farm stays, on-farm dinners, weddings. Outdoor recreation, this is one that people often don't think about as agritourism as their kind of first step. But those things where there's hunting will happen, fishing, trails, there's foot races. There's one in Minnesota that's actually a race through a sunflower farm.
Mhm.
And so those things can really be combined in just incredibly creative kinds of ways. And then, of course, entertainment, pumpkin patches, festivals, um, even up in my area, like We Fest, one of the largest country music festivals in the country, is actually held on like a farm grounds. That's where it started, and they rent out hay fields from the neighboring farms for hosting overnight camping. So s- sometimes these kinds of activities, we may think of them first as farming and agriculture activities, and other times they may be something like, say, WeFest, that the first thought is, oh, that's tourism. But then when you kind of backtrack into it, it's like, oh, yeah, those things are still connected to agriculture and are helping those farms to put together their financial plans and keep the lights on. So, because of this intersection between agriculture and tourism, I think it's important, to talk a little bit about tourism and what makes it successful. So, in my research around rural tourism, and especially like what makes it sustainable over time for small communities to have, those festivals that last year in, year out. And oftentimes, what gets talked about is this idea of it being authentic. And that sounds nice, but trying to figure out like how do we get there? How do you get to authentic can feel really, really elusive. And it's almost like by trying to engineer authentic, it almost can feel like you're going to like make it impossible to get there. And so I've developed this diagram, but really just trying to illuminate how that idea of like authentic and sustainable tourism events happen in communities. So often, much like an iceberg, if you were to visit a community or you went to a farm for a tour or something, you're like, gosh, that felt really good. I really liked it. Why can't we do that here too? You're just seeing that surface piece and where it feels good, it seems to work, it clicks. You want to go back. So that's the public piece, that front facing. And those are those opportunities for residents and visitors to really experience the community or your farm. But below the surface, what's really informing that are a variety of things. And I would say the foundation of it is always going to be that historical context. So that can be shared in the region. So when you guys are meeting, as Region 9 and you're kind of looking around the area, you have some shared geography. There's some shared um, history around indigenous communities, around migration and immigration and things that are shared across your region that really inform who's in your community. Even we were talking when we were getting set up, but about the space that you're in and that history of the building, the way that it's been kind of refreshed and renewed. All of those things are that historical context. And I would say that they're also related then into those community touchstones. So those are the things where, your region may have that historical context, but within a community or potentially even like at your farm, that there are going to be kind of touchstones and claims to fame that can be reimagined and renewed over time. So much like those pillars in the room with you, where they've, been reimagined with murals. Um, with any luck, those same pillars could easily be in that space in another 50 years. And maybe there's a different design that's desired or a different purpose for the building, but that physical space can be refreshed and renewed. Within an individual farm, that may be, if you have a gem of a barn or an outbuilding kind of structure, that can be renewed, or maybe that's really how you give people directions in your areas, like, oh, turn at that gabled barn. Um, that may be your claim to fame that can be renewed and refreshed. And then on top of all of that, always are those local interests. And that's not just, speaking broadly, it's really about who's in the room, who's doing the work, who's serving on those leadership boards, and who's really like driving the bus at the time. So for those of you, with a farm, just thinking about my farm and that example that I shared earlier, we actually had purchased it from a centennial farm family. So they had had it for over 100 years. And so they had kind of a whole way of doing things before. And then, that provided that historical context. It was a community touchstone. It was one of those places people literally had had their graduation photos taken there. Um, but then for that local interest, we still had to figure out, what did we want to do? What were we passionate about? What did we care about? So that we weren't just going through the motions, but that we were actually figuring out, like, what feels authentic to us. So this is important because agritourism has a lot of value to offer to communities, to farmers, and for consumers. So trying to figure out, what all of this means, what are the opportunities for you, is worth your time to explore. There's so much opportunity here to, consider diversifying your income, being able to really connect with consumers and community and kind of fill your social bucket and some of those personal needs. And it's also a really helpful tool for generational farm transitions, whether that's just helping young children to feel connected to farm practices and agricultural traditions, or for adult children that want to come back to the farm and want to provide enough income to be able to live there and build a life. For consumers, they're really looking for those authentic experiences. They may be like, my aunt, where they grew up on a farm but don't have access to one all the time, or like my cousins that were, a generation removed, but still wanted to feel connected to that kind of family lore and legacy. Lots of consumers are also looking to learn new skills. There may be people that actually want to learn about, trimming goat hooves and some of those like really um, base basic, care kinds of activities. There are lots of farm stays where part of the package is being able to help with chores and, haul feed and water animals and all of that. And then there is an element too in our day and age. We are such visual people and communicators, especially through social media. So, um, you know, you don't just have to stick with the flash bulbs of the days of old in order to share photos from inside of a barn. But now there are all kinds of opportunities to have people help share your farm experience and help promote what you're doing, and have that actually be part of the product. That may be photo shoots at sunflower farms or family photos at Christmas tree farms, or some of the family activities that happen through on-farm experiences. And then for communities as well, there are just so many opportunities, um, really for that economic development and to be helping to shore up and build resiliency for farm communities. We don't get to predict the weather. We don't get to predict the commodities markets. So having some additional tools to reach back to, and to help make sure that you are able to sleep at night and to feel good and secure in your business, especially when it can be so closely related to family traditions and legacy, uh, and those, really heartfelt kinds of moments. It means a lot to be able to have that economic resiliency. It also provides a lot of recreation for local and regional residents. This isn't just tourism for, strangers from far, far away. I'll show you a little bit here that my research is really showing that local and regional audience is really taking advantage of it. And then there's a lot of opportunities for, increasing local food access as well through those different opportunities. And just because, you may live in a rural area does not mean that you have access to farm experiences and agriculture experiences. So one example of this, I am just on the tail end of a project doing case study profiles for 4 different farms in the state that do agritourism. And this is just one example, but in my work around community economics, I have a specialization of working with cell phone data to actually look at where do people go when they move through a community. And so I was able to use that data to look at, in this example was a corn maze. I also did a tree farm that's in the metro. So I looked at one rural, one metro. And in both cases, their visitors predominantly came from within a 50-mile region. So that 50-mile marker is used because in tourism research, that's usually kind of the cutoff of thinking about, where might you need to get a hotel or stay overnight, and be more in kind of visitor mode versus day travel mode. So this is just one example, but it's really fun to finally actually have some technology and data to be able to give us some sightlines into this. The other interesting thing from this particular, the corn maze, was that I was able to see that this corn maze had the visitor traffic equivalent to a regional golf course. And that, it just blows me away because they have an organic corn and bean rotation farm. And so instead of that being plowed under, to be turned into a golf course, it's staying in agricultural production, and is being made available to the community as a recreation opportunity. They bring out all of the kindergarten students from the community, so it's a great social connection for the owners, as well as, helping them to make their business viable. So as I said earlier, that I was not going to come in and give you a bunch of shoulds of what you should be doing or should bring to your farm or your business. And so one of the materials that Anne very generously printed out for me is actually like a business planning guide that I hope that you take some time with. And part of, my goal is just to make sure that you have a little bit of space to be thinking about, is it right for me? No is a complete sentence. So it doesn't have to be something that you want to take on. It could be no, never. It could be, just not right now. Thank you, Anne. I saw the note that you said. If it's maybe, like, consider visiting some of those businesses in your region and kick the tires, see what you think. And if you're yes, and you want to start it, I would really encourage you to check out the new Ag Plan tool. Some of you may be familiar with that. It's been around for a long time for commodity farm business planning. And I've been part of a project to actually build out an agritourism business planning tool. So the link is there for you. And then if you already have agritourism activities on the farm, make sure first and foremost that you are accounting for safety and insurance. Those are like top priorities. I don't want you taking on any unnecessary risk. And then by all means, like, connect with farm organizations and networks relevant to your field. So there's all kinds of specialty crop, Minnesota Christmas Tree Association, all kinds of things. And then don't forget to leverage tourism-focused resources like Minnesota Grown or Explore Minnesota. If you spend a lot of time in agriculture, I think it can be easy to forget that there's this whole other kind of mechanism to help you get the word out and market this, and that's really their specialty. That's what they're there for and can be really great resources to help you get off and running. Okay, so I gave you all the answer, of what all things people suggested, and then I wanted to just kind of close out by just sharing the things that I actually did. We did end up hosting a barn dance, which was really fun as a community event. We held fall festivals for our family and friends, and we held some fundraisers as well. And I found very quickly, as much as I really liked that, um, it was also like not for me. So as I said, no is an okay answer. Um, and more because like I really found that maintaining a balance with all of that and hosting is really challenging. And so my goal when I'm doing all of this work is really just to make sure that you um, have those resources and can make that decision. And by all means, try some things and see what you think. Um, as much fun as doing all of that hosting really was, it also was a great learning opportunity to be able to say, okay, I need a little space. And I can say no to the shoulds. So what could growing agritourism do for your business or for your region? And I think I might have time for like one or two questions here. But then I do also have my contact information.
I have a question. Going back to your farm and your
Yeah,
list, would
yeah.
you ever do one of them again now that you've gone through it? Like graduation photos don't require much for you. Opening it up for wedding photos or something like that, where it doesn't require you to be all hands on all day and organizing. Because
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of different moving parts, especially
Oh
with
my
a.
gosh. There's so many things. Um, I think the photos are a really great call out. And that's one that I think is an opportunity that might be my starting point of where I might really nudge farmers um, to go. So let's say if you had an apple orchard where you were only doing wholesale things and like you didn't really want the public there, you didn't want to be hosting fall festivals, that kind of thing. Um, something like photos with spring flowers could be a really great opportunity in thinking that you could contract with external photographers and just provide the space and then have a check for cash. And that example really comes to mind because it's like at the far opposite end of when you get paid for apples. So to be able to get cash for doing a spring photo shoot, that can be somebody's grocery bill. Um, and that kind of contrast is where I encourage a lot of people to start. And so I really appreciate that you brought that up because I agree. I think that, you know, photos are a great, kind of small lift where you don't ever actually have to be open to the public. You don't have to be advertised or anything. But it can be a great way to add some cash flow, um, and not have it be too intrusive.
I have one more question.
Yes.
Because these are all things that, like, okay, so in any of your planning with bringing people to your site, did you find that you didn't want them touching and getting in and messing with your stuff, so to speak? I mean, I don't know if the barn dances, if you cleared everything out, but they kind of wander in their own little areas. So I'm curious how.
Yeah. And that is one of the biggest challenges, and where, that piece of like liability insurance and the state statute around, limiting some of the liabilities for farms is so critical. Um, in my case, like I didn't have to worry about large livestock, but that I think is like my first concern, and where I've heard some really wild stories of, people getting in a pen with livestock that you should not get in with. Um, so that kind of thing is, where people can wander is very, very real. The other piece as far as where people go is also around accessibility too. So, um,
Oh, good point.
planning planning for where people can go, making sure that they have full access to the areas that you're intending, for people to go to. It's both kind of keeping them out, but also making sure people can come in. Um, but yeah, you have to plan for people being kind of squirrely and not knowing what to do, and do your best to make sure that you're limiting that, but it's a very real thing. So I've seen some places where people um, they may actually put in like their agritourism stuff like on a different corner of their farm. So it may not be like with their main operation. So let's say you had like a big commodity farm with like huge implements and things. That may not be the safest place for the public. So it may be better to think about, oh, you have this other spot with the field access that you could have people park where they're away from that large implement kind of yard, or um, more dangerous or volatile farm animals and things. Um, that's all part of that planning process. And I will say that that's included in that ag plan business plan as well, is to be thinking about the layout of your farm and where people would be visiting. So it's very much worth considering. And then I will also give a shout out for the Minnesota Department of Health. My my peer, Carrie, over there, she actually will come out and do some site visits with people as well. So if you had concerns about how people were going to be interacting with animals and how to keep your animals safe and your visitors safe, especially with diseases that can be spread and things, she'll come out and help you plan for that. So there's lots of great resources to help, but you have to be intentional in advance. So I hope that, a few of the resources that I provided today kind of help to get you started. And then, by all means, feel free to reach out to me. And I will share the slideshow with you all afterwards as well.
Thank you so much, DeeDee.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to step out now, but I hope that you guys have a great meeting otherwise, and thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. All right. Well, Katie and Kent, thank you. You got caught in the rain, which has kept some people away from us tonight. Over here. Yeah. Say, well, since we are small, we have some. So where should
Yeah. We could, do people, I guess, do we want this recorded still, or others, we could also turn off the Zoom, and you guys can just connect right to the.
No, I think that we could share it with a lot more people if we record it. Are you okay with being recorded? Yes.
So yeah, I guess if you want to join the Zoom link, I'd go and send it your way, that would be easiest.
And we can start with introductions, so, I mean, once we'll give you a minute to get set up. And then, it looks like the food is coming in, so maybe we can get the food too while you're setting up.
You just want to take that, right?
Yeah.
Over there and change the days. Right.
It was earlier and you guys should.
Sounds like from you.
Yeah.
It's a great set of party.
Yeah, I was gonna say you can just look my size and I know your size and I'll
Oh, yes.
I just kind of saw reverse anything.
So. What's that work for you?
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like this.
And then, yeah, you can plug it. It should be all charged out.
It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're pound break.
What?
Did you get it? Two
It might just be a guest network. Or guest.
I do. I we got like 4 to 3. Yeah, this is wild.
Interesting to see how this brings some of goes.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, it's bring on this. Yeah, we can do it up and we
The wind does not, I don't.
Yeah, almost have these little earmuffs on or something, just. The hair, like, phone and you can.
Yeah.
So it's a post, thing on and.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly, that's.
And if I was walking into the wind, I could barely hear the AirPods in my ears. Just a while. Sometimes. But every time I'm here. It's like, wicked binge.
Is that not working for you? Interesting.
We have to go to like cheap out, like if that's not like.
Big game early.
Yeah, because it should, I mean, because I'm pretty sure it's the network I'm on, but we could ask. Yeah, that's the network I'm on too, but I can ask.
And then.
Oh, yeah, that's.
And then, yeah, nice stuff. Yeah, away from.
Well, I think, most of the time I fall asleep. I don't mean it's spiritual, or.
So troubling.
Oh, this is shit. Like okay, from the middle of it, right? And my daughter is it's still shape. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty intense. Under winter. This week's gonna be fun.
So, 2 days. The winter.
That's the couple that.
Yeah.
But.
Because now it says connected, but
Yeah.
there we go.
Just need the Lord.
Yeah. A little competition.
So, my hobby is in ostrich, right?
Yes, yeah, it should be off.
So then you guys.
I would say.
Ready to.
Yeah.
I just.
Oh, there's no like. So there can be some that'll be wildly.
Yes.
Yeah, very much. Years.
Yeah, things, but then.
Yeah, he's been she's so funny. She's told me that instead of shooting the rabbits, that I should build them a little lettuce trail in the row. Like I should come up with that, like, I should come up with that. So, good problem solver.
So the food is ready in here, if you'd like to grab some, there's a bottle of wine open if you would like some of that, there's also water over here. And then we can introduce ourselves to Kate before they get started.
Just text me the password.
Okay, and then you get started working.
Oh, okay, well then.
Yep.
So, it's skewer stuff for you guys.
And you wanna tell us anything about it?
I mean, I surely can tell you, kind of walk you through it.
Sure, that'd be great.
So the first.
If you guys want to grab a bite, the rest will come forward.
I might be after.
Okay.
Stuff. And then next door, we got the, original chicken bites, a hand-breaded chicken, and then this our cheesy garlic finger roll as the base for the bottom of it. So if you want to go the vegetarian route, you know, that's awesome. And if you want to put a little meat on it, just get in there. And next is the quinoa bowl. I shallow fried it in oil, so it's also vegan. It's just got a lot of good Mediterranean flavors, and then there's some tzatziki there. Turkey pasta salad, just fine. And strawberry, blueberry, and then goat cheese skewers. We've got some charcuterie skewers, so good salami, pickle, and cheese, and then next door is the vegan veggie skewer. So I've got a little bit of garlic, chopped bit, mushrooms.
Yummy lasagna yourself.
Well, I hope you guys enjoy.
Yeah. We always enjoy.
It sure does look nice though.
Yeah, that's like, that's a beach.
Yes. With a pleasure, for you guys, because you kind of do whatever, so I appreciate that. So you guys enjoy.
Okay, thank you.
And then tonight, you know, just to lock the door.
Yes, I locked the door and then I texted Natasha.
Yep, perfect. Thank you guys.
Thank you so much.
See you Saturday.
Yeah. And then Jessica sends her condolences. She was triple booked tonight, so. Thanks.
It would have been fun. She's a busy lady.
Very busy, yep. Yeah, she was saying today she got through her email. Our executive director is on leave right now, and then we've had our old finance director, we got a finance director who then left. So she went through 4 people's email inboxes today. Yeah.
Staff are you?
I think we're, I would say 12 to 14. So yeah, not too big, but we've been adding some more people in the past year or so.
How long have you been there?
3.5 years. Yep.
You've got seniority at this point.
Dude, seriously, yeah. Are you guys enjoying your MCAP roles? Yeah.
Oh, and it's like 4 years. Hi.
Yes. It's like, this is how we've always done things. It's like, well, actually, it's been about 1.5 years, so.
But yeah.
Yeah.
Really like it. And educator is really fun. It's, you know, travel and not things to care about. It's feels nice to be still around this moment.
Yep. Yeah. Is your funding all good?
Yeah, we're most state funded, unfortunately, so that feels like it's really.
Is Heidi back from federal? No? It's cool.
Snow house.
Still there.
I think she'll be back soon. Part of the one administration she was gonna work first, she was always planning to be back by like May, because she has a little has been spending time between DC and the last year, so I think she's ready to be back.
Yep.
So we always kind of combine our evening meetings with a social hour, so there is a bottle of wine open if anybody would like some help herself. And let's tell Katie and Kent who we are, so they know who they're talking to. I'm Ann, I've spoken to you on the phone, so thank you for making the drive down, appreciate it a lot.
Here.
Go next one.
Yeah, I'm Mary Fisher from a little bit less than an hour away. We have a farm. They're just interested in hearing what you have to say. This is an emerging topic. Well,
Yeah, what kind of operation?
we do pasture stock. Yeah, your turn.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Peter. I own Stone Front Garden, primarily cut flowers and then expanding our baked goods.
And Caitlin's an artist with the flowers.
I hope so.
Dan Zimmerly, I'm a Cedar Creek Farm, about 30 minutes south to here, so we're a produce farm, used to play.
I feel like I've seen you before.
Yeah. Yeah, vegetable farmer, that's me.
My name is Jennifer, and I'm not anywhere close to all of these guys with their operations. I have a little garden stand I do for my neighborhood. And I raise a couple rounds of meat birds a year for a few. And then I have my own big vegetable garden that there's a lot of details that I'm learning and are more. Still in my second meeting, so
That's great. And do you want to talk about yourself?
Sure. Thanks. I am the climate resilience and public health educator. We were just talking about tenure within MCAP, and I have 9 months, so I'm still fresh, although not the newest.
And you have kind of an unusual background for extension too, don't you?
Yeah, so actually started in pediatric hematology, oncology, and cellular transplant in the Twin Cities, and then through exposure and experience and everything, I realized that problems with healthcare as well as public health were more at the systems level. So expanded beyond that. Studied planetary health, which is taking climate change even further back, really focusing on like the interconnection of humans within the environment and the role that we play for the health of the planet and also how the health of the planet plays into human health.
Cool.
And I'm Katie, so same team as Kent, but I am the agriculture person on the team. So I actually have a degree in agronomy, and I grew up, still kind of do help my dad, who owns a very large corn and soybean farm. But in this role, I've gotten to work with a lot more small, diversified growers, so it's very fun to play in all these different worlds of farming.
Where's your dad's farm, Katie?
North Dakota, near Minot. So, like I said, we are a group that we call MCAP because the full name is very long, but the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Partnership. It's a pretty new group within Extension, and we are very future focused. So thinking about how we can prepare for and adapt to how our future climate is expected to change. We show that we have some pretty different sectoral expertise on the team, but we also have people who do things with like housing and small town economies and tribal partners. So we're very, very deep in breadth and depth. We do a lot of research on the team, and then there's people like Kent and I whose roles are education and helping people do the things they want to do to prepare to adapt for a changing climate. And yeah, we are very fortunate to have great partners across the state, Region 9. So how we kind of envision this talk going is that she should start with maybe just some changes to Minnesota's climate that have been observed on the science side, but I think a good place to start, since we're such a small group, is like, why are you here tonight? We're talking about changing extreme weather patterns, like what have you guys experienced? What's coming up for you? And you can think on it because you're eating.
We've been so dry, and then we had all this rain.
yeah.
About 20 minutes.
I think for me personally, this is my 5th season farming, and my first 3 years were drought, and then last year was really wet, so it's been like just opposite ends of the spectrum extreme. So just like learning to be adaptable is kind of like a necessity at this point.
Yeah, trying to improve soil health, so all the bacteria is still in the ground and can withstand all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that what we're gonna share corroborates a lot of what you already know, experience. So to start, I just had grabbed some slides from the DNR. This is showing you temperature change in Minnesota that we've observed between the late 1800s until about now. So we've got 3 different state of Minnesotas on this graphic. Across the board, we've seen that our average annual temperature has increased by about 3 degrees over that time period. But when you chunk it out and look at it as average annual temperature as opposed to winter low temperature and summer high temperature, we see that that trend is not consistent across the state. So take, for instance, if we're looking at winter lows, which is in the middle of our screen right here, that's where we've seen the most warming in our state. Minnesota is warming nearly faster in winter than any other state in the country. Again, it's when we've seen our most dramatic period of warming over that time period. But we also note that that warming in particular has been the most dramatic in the north as opposed to the south central region of the state. That's because of a process called Arctic amplification, where melting sea ice is basically causing warmer air to sneak down into Minnesota. And then we actually haven't seen too much change to our summer high temperatures yet. And in the southern part of the state, we've actually historically seen some cooling. I always get questions about that. It's a couple of theories. One is because of irrigation, which has cooling potential. Another one is that over this time period, there were a couple of pretty significant fall deaths. And so that particulate matter in the air might have contributed to cooling or made less warming present, I guess is how you could say it. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify. People are always like, why are we cooling when you're here talking about climate change?
So do your winter lows, do you think that correlates with, changing zone 4 growing to zone 5?
So
So I real job, I work at Farmers Garden Center, and I'm the nursery manager. I shouldn't say real job, but I'm paying job that pays my living. And as a nursery manager, I won't sell and stock zone 5 because I know we are not consistently reliably hardy for Minnesota. Southern Minnesota. So how is that how they change and regulate by winter?
No, that's a really great question. So in a way, it has to do with winter. When we're talking about growing zones, they're talking about the most extreme of those temperatures that you experience over the time period that they're looking at. We're looking at averages. So that's the difference, is that for the shifting growing zones, they looked at I guess you could say how much warmer those extremes that we're used to here have warmed by. So again, it's a little different because we're looking at winter lows over many more years typically, and also just we're not picking out the most extreme days, but it's definitely related to the general warming that you see
grow more. I like the idea of growing different and more things, but unfortunately, all the vegetables and stuff, they're all losing.
Right. And related to that too, I don't know if I had this slide, I think I skipped it at the same time, but in Minnesota, we've seen that the growing season has extended by about 2 weeks over this same time period, which I'm sure all of you have probably noticed yourselves. Yeah, and that's expected to continue into the future.
Do you see it more spring side or fall side?
That's a really and I don't have a good answer to that yet. But that's something I should ask. We have a climatologist on staff, and I should ask him that.
I kind of see it, I don't know, maybe you guys, but in the fall, like towards winter, we're not getting winter early. Because we can do things longer, and I'm like, oh, well, I wish we would have had this time already and kept, over summer, since it's to be spring,
But I plant things earlier too than I used to, so.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to see what the average.
Yeah, and we do have that data. We have, historic freeze dates, frost dates. So yeah, that would be interesting to look at versus spring versus fall. Related to how Minnesota's climate is changing, we've got, we're gonna take a look at precipitation now, which again, I'm sure you all have noticed. So again, we've got data from the DNR. It's a really noisy graph because it's showing you precipitation from every year over that late 1800s to 2024 timeline. But you can see that there's a very clear trend line. So what that trend line is telling us is that precipitation has increased annually by about 3 inches over that time period, which is pretty crazy to think about. The other thing that I want to point out is that all these wiggles are still a part of normal climate patterns, and we'll continue to see year to year variability no matter how the climate changes in the future. So I always try to tell people with climate change, we're going to show them how, averages of how we expect things to change in the future. That doesn't mean that every year is going to be the exact same. And related to precip, I think, like you were saying, other people mentioned, we're seeing that these swings from extreme events are becoming a lot more frequent. So this is a fun graph pulled from Minnesota Public Radio, but again, using data from the DNR. So it's looking at a timeline of Minnesota's mega rain events. Does anybody know what a mega rain is?
I think inches or more in a certain time.
You're really close. Okay, so it's when 6 inches of rain cover more than 1,000 square miles in 24 hours.
Oh,
So
1,000 square miles.
yes, we're talking really, really big rainstorms. And also to be a mega rain, they have to have at least 8 inches falling somewhere in that 24-hour period. So I talk to a lot of people who have a hard time visualizing weather, but I always say, if you outside in a mega rain, you would never forget it for So from the mid-1860s to the mid-1960s, we saw 4 of those every 100 years. From the mid-1960s to about 2000, we saw 3 of those in 33 years. And in just 14 years, 2000 to 2014, there were 5 of those events in 14 years. So the magnitude of these wet extreme events is increasing. And we've seen that so far, that the wet extremes have increased more than the dry so far in the Midwest. And we also seen what you were referring to, that these transitions between wet and dry periods have increased.
Just driving here, I don't even live an hour away, but I came across 3 farms putting tile in here.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
That was just tonight.
Yeah, I think the last couple growing seasons have really freaked people out. And it's something that we expect to see more of in the future. It's more tiling. So I wanted to move on to there. We have a lot more historic data, but for the sake of time, I just wanted to kind of shift us to think about, based on what we've already observed, what we might expect to plan for in the future. So we are a part of a team that uses global climate models. That's like the bread and butter of the research we do. You can think of climate models as basically very, very, very long-term forecasts, where we're not talking about forecasts for, the next week, the next month. We're talking about models that create projections for the next 20 to 30 years. But they're using those same principles of how our atmosphere, land, water, and ice all interact with each other. They're just basically adjusting for how much carbon we expect to emit in the future, and how much warming we might see as a result of that carbon that's been emitted. So the other thing to keep in mind with climate models on a very basic level is that they don't give us one specific answer, they give us a range of answers. So I always tell people that scientists are really good at understanding how our oceans and our atmosphere and ice and biology all interact with each other. What they are not very good at is understanding how society is going to act in the future. So there are futures where we might act really strongly to act on climate change, reduce emissions. That's going to result, if you look at this blue line, we see that on this graph it's showing us how much emissions we might expect to see by the end of the century. If we move to a future where we're significantly reducing emissions, that blue line corresponds to this blue line, where we're seeing the lowest amount of warming. Conversely, if in the future we can continue to be really heavily reliant on fossil fuels, we will move towards a world in which we see a pretty dramatic amount of warming. So for the sake of today, again, just keep in mind, I'm not giving you one specific number for what to plan for. I'm gonna give you a range of what we might expect, and we can talk about how you use that range to actually make it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have heard so much of this and I just. Like what happened, I mean, it's just a buzzword and controversial and everything. What happens with climate change? I see, obviously, there's warming that we're worried, and there's cooling that can't, it all interacts. I understand that agriculture, a lot of things have, an effect on that, but what is our ultimate scare with this? Like, the world will just keep warming and warming and warming over time to an I mean.
That's a really great question. So part of it is warming we see the concern about warming with both extremes. So warming to the point where certain places that have historically been quite warm are becoming quite warmer. That means that's kind of pushing them out of the range of what's a healthy environment to live in. Big one on the flip side is the loss of ice, the loss of snow cover that results from warming, because there's something called the albedo effect, which is basically how much light reflects off a given surface. Typically, what we see is that with a material like snow, it's able to reflect quite a bit of heat off of itself.
Yeah.
If we have less snow and we have a surface like grass or dirt that's absorbing that heat instead, that's creating like another feedback loop, essentially, where the warming is then becoming more dramatic because we don't have ice, so it's not reflecting back. So we are just continuing to build up more and more heat in a really, that's I think the simplest way I would describe it. Another thing is that it's likely to affect our oceans, which affects like jet streams, can change, ocean currents, but also wind patterns. Was there anything else in particular you
No,
were curious about?
That's great, thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, I would add to, I guess, like our whole life is sort of based on these
There should be
systems of
equilibrium.
spring to summer to fall, and like all of our plants that we grow for food are sort of accustomed to these patterns, and also like if we have these extreme weather events. And again, we don't have rain, there's no soil moisture for the corn and soy to grow. And then some point in July, there's a massive amount of rain that wipes stuff out. I think that's the other thing is there's just more extreme weather
Yes.
events.
Yep.
That make it really demand.
And then the last adding to that, part of what we work on is the adaptation piece, right? And if we're thinking about natural systems, even though there's been variability in climate over hundreds, thousands of years, it's been gradual. And so things have had time to adapt to that. And what we're seeing is this exponential increase beyond anything that we've measured that we can't keep up to, even now, and like the current emissions that we have. And if we continue down the paths that we're continuing, like it's only going to get worse if we're not keeping up.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm around a lot of conventional farms just from my neighborhood and where I grew up and what we did growing up, and it's always climate change, just. It's all for advertising, it's all for, just,
Yeah.
and I don't believe that, but this is good to know.
Yeah, and it's honestly like kudos to you for like thinking about how to have that conversation. 'Cause that's one of the hardest things to do, I think, especially in agriculture.
So how is regenerative farming or regenerative grazing affecting, I know there's a bunch of studies being done, there's a bunch of farmers that are doing it. How is that? Is there anything that shows what that has done to the climate in that area or changes?
Because I don't think that we are able to discern on like a historic level, like how much farming we might have seen if we were not.
Because the animals, how long people are doing their research.
Right, exactly. But recently there's been a fair bit of research to suggest that doing that regenerative type of grazing can help store carbon in the soil instead of having it in our atmosphere, which is contributing to that warming. I think there's still a lot of research that needs to be figured out about how long it's able to store that carbon for. And again, like how intense that can help solve the problem of climate change, basically. But it's definitely something that is, I think, more and more explored as something we probably should do in the future. And even not in terms of the carbon piece of it, like there's lots of benefits in terms of restoring ecosystem health. And
Oh, yeah, just the soil temperature exactly brings it down, and moisture
So
retention in the soil.
well, it's really important for the adapting part that Kent was talking about, or thinking about if we want soils that are adapted for bigger rainstorms or drier summers, like those, that's a piece of preparing for that as well. So let's talk about what we're gonna see in Minnesota in the future. I think kind of three that we always talk about with people are, I think, warmer, wetter, more extreme. So basically a continuation of what we've seen so far, but there are a couple caveats. So when I say warmer, we've seen our most dramatic warming in winter, but we expect to see more dramatic warming in summer as well in the future. When I say wetter, we expect that we'll continue to see this trend of really wet springs, but actually we expect to see drier summers on average. And then again, just more extreme, bigger storms when they do occur, drier summers, or more quickly happening droughts when they do occur. So I wanted to pull out some of the data because I think it helps people to visualize the type of things we're talking about. So we're looking at Minnesota for seasons, autumn, summer, spring, winter, by the mid-century. So think like the next 15 to 20 years. This is showing you the change in seasonal precipitation that we expect under that top line emission scenario with the most warming. So in autumn, depending on where you are, we see that precipitation is expected to be variable. If you're in the central part of the state, it's expected to be a little drier. If you're in the north and south, it's expected to be a little wetter, but we don't see really huge changes. We're looking at, a 5 to 9% change. In the summer, depending on where you are in the state, again, particularly in that more central region, we can see more dramatic drying in the realm of anywhere from 15 to 19% decreases. Spring, we expect to similarly see pretty significant increases depending on where you are in the state. So somewhere in the realm of 5 to 15% increases in precip. And winter, we actually also expect to see winters get significantly wetter. So in winter, especially in the southern part of the state, we expect to see more like a 16 to 21% increase in winter precip. And the thing to note is that because of warming, some of that might be less like the really light, fluffy snow that we love to ski in, and more like the wet, heavy stuff. It's really annoying, or possibly freezing rain. So with climate models, we're able to zoom into different parts of the state and talk about what changes we might expect to see for that region. So I went into our climate model tool and pulled out changes we expect to see for your region, West Central. So in spring, around that 2040, 2060 timeline, we expect to see, an extra ½ inch to inch change on average. Whereas in the summer, depending on where you are, you could see essentially no change to nearly an inch of change, and nearly an inch decrease on average in the summer. You guys probably know this because you are farmers, but I think it can be hard to wrap around our minds about, an inch and a half. What does that really mean? Is that a big deal? This is a very complicated graph, but it's showing you data from last spring, which we all know was very wet. And so the thing that I wanted to point out is that this graph is showing you spring precipitation totals from a couple different parts around the state. We've got Duluth, Rochester, Twin Cities. In the Twin Cities, for example, they saw, about 5 extra inches of rain. But in places like Duluth International Falls, they only saw, an extra inch or inch and a half on top of their seasonal average. And it still resulted in pretty significant impacts for these locations that even didn't receive that much extra rain. So that's just something to think in mind for scale. And I always feel like the bearer of bad news when I talk about these impacts, but we have to know what to expect so that we can prepare for them, right? So again, this is probably not a surprise to anybody, but with wetter springs, it's going to be hard to get into the field in a timely manner, perhaps some reduced work days because of it. Erosion and nutrient loss are going to be big things to look out for, along with establishment and rooting issues in wet soils. And pastures, we know that wet, soggy pastures can result in some extra stress or disease in animals. And on the flip side, dry summers, we need to think about how we can store water for increased irrigation needs. This is a graph from the drought monitor in 2021 when we had very extreme, the highest level of drought in Minnesota. So I think we'll see people going back to perhaps strategies they used then. We know dry summers can result in the abortion of fruits or flowers for specialty crops. And we also know that can contribute to some weed issues if you're working in pastures. You probably know this, but with dry summers, it means that some of the good species go fallow and some weeds are able to take over, which is much fun. Just to wrap up the future climate part, I wanted to just take a look at temperature. So again, we've got a map of Minnesota. We're looking at in 2040 to 2060 timeline, how many extra days that are warmer than 90 degrees Fahrenheit we might expect to see in the future. So we can see that the northern Minnesota is pretty sheltered from an increase in the number of those days, but the south will be pretty dramatically impacted. And I wanted to look at the flip side of temperatures too. So we've got same time period, still looking at the whole state. But I pulled out how many fewer days we might expect to see with a low of 32 degrees or lower. And this is not an interesting map because it's really consistent across the whole state. So it means that everyone's going to be pretty dramatically impacted by that. I went ahead and pulled out those specific numbers. So with those 90 degrees highs, we expect to see, a 20 to 26 day increase on average. And then with those 32 degree or lower lows, we expect to see anywhere from 22 to 25 fewer of those on average. And again, this is not something that's going to happen immediately. This is going to be a slow kind of climb over the next 15 to 20 years. But it kind of wakes you up to a scale of changes that we're thinking that we have to prepare for. And again, the bad news, what does all this warming mean? So I was calling out the specific high and low extremes. With hotter summers, we expect to see, impacts again to crop development, flash drought. Warmer temperatures can exacerbate drought, obviously, because of increased evapotranspiration, again, stress for everybody, not just plants and animals, but also humans who are in charge of them. There are lots of studies that I'm sure Ken can talk about that show that agitation increases when temperatures rise. And then some soil compaction issues if it's dry and hot and cracking. And then if we think about warmer temperatures year round, I didn't call out the average change in temperatures, but it's expected to be about, 4 to 5 degree increase on average for the whole year. It just creates more opportunities for pests and pathogens to find a home that is suitable for them. They may creep northwards. Fertilizer application, this is less of an issue with smaller scale farms, but with the larger scale farms, they typically apply their nitrogen in the fall, and so or manure in the fall, and so you likely have to delay that because the soils are gonna stay warmer for a little while longer. And then we know that with warmer temperatures in winter, even just on average, having heavier, wetter snow or freezing rain has the ability to greatly impact if you are, participating in some winter markets or protecting your hoop house from freezing snow, freezing rain, etc. So that is all of the not foodie stuff, but I think that we need space to acknowledge that it can be really overwhelming to get all this information in like a 20-minute talk. But I also, for the sake of time, think it's really helpful to think about, okay, this is what's likely to happen, so how can I plan for it? How do I use this data? It's so far away, it's 15 to 20 years. I always think this example is super helpful. So this was an example where they were talking to orchard growers, specifically almond growers, and talking about how you could use weather forecasts versus climate data for planning how to make improvements to your farm. So a weather forecast would be able to tell you that the likelihood of frost tomorrow is 80%. Obviously, then you would say, I should probably implement some frost protection measures, work later tonight to put up maybe some warning measures, etc. With climate, because we are working on long-term averages, we're not able to tell you that in 2045, that year is going to be especially bad for drought, or on March 6, 2042, we're going to get 6 inches of rain in a day. That's just not the type of way that these models work. But we can tell you the frequency of events, and you can still make plans based on that. So in this example, they were saying that the climate data was telling them that they could expect, on average, a 50% decrease in the number of frost occurrences by March of 2040. So then the decisions you make with that data become different, but they're still important. So you might decide whether or not to switch to an early or a late blooming variety. If you're going to invest in a wind machine because those occurrences are going to become more frequent, etc. So it's more about thinking about those large term investments than day-to-day planning. And I always bring this up as an example too. So in our climate world, there's a lot of emphasis on something called scenario planning, but it's not just in the climate world. Like Shell has used it, a bunch of Fortune 500 companies have used it. Basically, scenario planning is all about walking yourself through what you're going to do for a certain scenario in the future. So in this example, let's say I'm, thinking about making plans for my farm in winter, and I'm really worried about a smoky summer or a warmer winter. I might actually, work with advisors or sit down and write down a plan that allows me to respond to these conditions for when they happen, even if I haven't experienced them yet. Because there's some research to suggest that actually walking through that process of preparing for something, even if you haven't experienced it yet, can help a lot in reducing stress if that event does occur, and can likely improve preparedness because you're not in crisis mode, as at least as your brain's already kind of run through and knows what to expect, so you can be a little more comfortable. So one thing that we always talk about is that some of these strategies for building resilience can be a really powerful way to modify your long-term plans for your farm. So if we know that these are the changes that we expect to see in our climate over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, these might be things that we consider moving towards on farm. So they're kind of based on a couple of key principles. This is a great guide from USDA. It's called Adaptation Resources for Agriculture. And in there, they talk about strategies that can make farms more resilient to all these changes. So big one is protecting and storing water and soil. Another is really staying on top of your pest management, working on improving IPM if you don't have one of those already. thinking about adjusting the timing of when you're going to plant something, or if you're planting something in a field that's always flooded out when it's a really wet spring, maybe that means that you think about moving that crop to someplace new or adding some infrastructure that allows you to get it out of the soil. Diversity, ecosystem functions are really big ones for being able to manage those shifts between really wet and really dry, or again, storing water, protecting soil. There's a lot of interest in diversity, so not just diversity of people or crops, but also new varieties, new markets. I think DeeDee's presentation fits really well in all of this. If you just think about on a very basic level, a strategy of diversifying your income streams, if you know that growing seasons are going to be more challenging in futures. Investing in health and safety, which is why Kent is here, is one that's often overlooked, but is a big piece of making your farm operation resilient. And then again, this data can be used to really help you think about upgrading your infrastructure if you're gonna, invest in your soil health or water storage, or increasing technology. So if you want to improve, like training for employees about how to spot certain diseases, but it kind of counts as technology if you have more highly skilled people. So these are kind of the buckets that we can think about building resilience through. This is a tool that we just launched on the website. It's called the Resilient Farm Planner. I will say it is mostly focused on corn and bean farmers right now. But with all that being said, the climate information that you can get in that tool is still relevant for you. So you can basically zoom into the tool for your region of the state, and then it'll kind of go through, summer, fall, winter, tell you things to watch out for, tell you things that maybe aren't going to change that much in your region in the future. And I will send you slides. Okay, yes, so then you don't have to write things down. Perfect, thanks. Okay. And I want to move on to Kent, but one thing I want to wrap up with, since we're such a small group and since you're all pretty small, diversified growers, is we're doing workshops where we're kind of doing a much deeper dive than I did this evening, where we're talking about climate risks, we're bringing in experts to talk about strategies that work for building resilience, and then we bring in technical service providers who can connect you to either people who can answer your questions or funding resources to do the things that you want to do. And we help you put it into a long-term plan that you can kind of follow over the next couple of years. So if that's something you're interested in, I will be here until the end of the evening. And I will pass it off to Kent.
Thanks.
Yes.
Well, I kind of like the open dialogue, so hopefully we get some more of that. So Katie spoke to you all about preparing your farm, your land, and the observed and projected changes. So I'm going to talk about the human aspect of this and protecting yourself so that you can care for that land. I was going to pose the question of what's the most valuable piece to farm? And then I was like, well, it might be like a chicken and the egg thing, because if you don't have land that's farmable, then the human piece doesn't matter. But then also, if you don't have humans to farm the land, so anyways, we'll skip that question. I brought it up. So I really love this graphic from the CDC, or it's adapted from the CDC anyway, that shows the multiple different ways, although it's not an exhaustive list, of how climate change impacts human health. The recent addition here being the mental health impacts, which unfortunately seems to be the general case with most of medicine and health, is that mental health comes in last, even though it's the most pressing thing. But some of the things that we're going to focus on for this presentation, it's kind of the feedback that we've been getting from farmers, mental health, but also extreme heat and air pollution. I think part of the reason why we're hearing that most is because we've had the most recent events related to those two factors. And then the mental health impacts being again, consensus of farmers coming and saying, hey, we're really struggling and need support in this, and what can we do? But I think to your question as well, part of the beauty of MCAP is that we have these different sectors of expertise
which we can also then sit and say, okay, climate change is happening. This is what it means for agriculture. This is what it means for human health. This is what it means for tribal nations. And then really taking that step back and seeing how it's all interconnected and interwoven. And it's not just that we're going to have to change the types of crops that we're growing, but also what does that mean for the humans that are caring for that land, and what does that mean for populations that have faced oppression and things. And so, like, it's a puzzle, right? And so piecing it all together. So like I said, we're going to focus on extreme heat and air pollution, direct and indirect impacts. And I apologize that this slide is really small on this screen. But this example is for extreme heat. We have the direct impacts. So things like heat illness, we'll talk about that and differentiating some of those. The exacerbation of comorbidities and then hospitalization. But we also need to be aware of the indirect impacts, especially as we talk about rural populations and some of our farming communities because of accessibility. So if we're thinking of indirect impacts of extreme heat, we may have increase in callouts, which means longer time for EMS to get to a farm, to an individual that needs service, overburdened healthcare systems and emergency departments. And then we also have increased risks of accidents, increased risks of violence, which Katie alluded to, increased transmission of infectious diseases and waterborne diseases, and then infrastructural disruptions as well. So it's not just the human health side, it's also this cumulative factors. All right, so again, extreme heat, because it's been recent, because it's something with maybe more likelihood that we can project with our models of saying we're getting warmer, we're experiencing we're expected to experience those 90-degree days more, which has implications for extreme heat events. It's the beginning qualifier for an extreme heat event from FEMA. So it has to be 90 degrees Fahrenheit and then for at least 2 days in a row. If we think about Minnesota, when we're warming, it's likely over summer, so the chance that those kind of combine into a stretch is more likely. Also, because extreme heat is the leading cause of weather-related deaths in the US. So it's estimated that about 1,300 deaths per year are caused by extreme heat, although that number is likely underrepresented because of the way that medical professionals write their death certificates and the qualifications to do so. So the number is likely a lot higher.
100 Minnesota.
No, national. So Minnesota, actually, it's one of those things where deaths that we've seen from extreme heat, I believe my data is correct in that it's from 1980 to 2020 or 2021 was 70 deaths from extreme heat. But we see annually 700 emergency department visits every year. So again, it's kind of this, well, is it an exacerbation of something that someone already has and then we're just not catching it in the death record? Or is it something that's an emergency but doesn't lead to death? So bad for a healthcare system, but not necessarily for human mortality. One of the other things with extreme heat is that when we're talking about heat illness, the different illnesses and then also the symptoms kind of build on each other and they look similar. So it can be hard to differentiate. One of the fortunate things about that is that the treatments are relatively similar. And so knowing this just alone is already great. Some of the things like rash, cramps, dizziness and fainting, all standalone can be heat illnesses, but then if they kind of appear together, then we're looking at maybe more of a heat exhaustion or heat stroke. And heat stroke is really important because that's a medical emergency. And so differentiating between these two, you'll see similar signs and symptoms. I'll stick to the heat stroke for now, just because it is that medical emergency. But it's important to note that heat exhaustion, if left untreated, quickly turns into heat stroke, or at least can. And then that has implications for human organs as well as death. So some of the signs and symptoms: throbbing headache, confusion, potentially fainting. Usually on like the tail end of heat stroke is when you faint, and it actually is just unconsciousness. Hot, red, dry skin, and then a body temperature of 103 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Rapid, strong pulse, which is different than exhaustion, nausea, and then that loss of consciousness. why this is a medical emergency, because once your body reaches 106 degrees Fahrenheit, your organs start to shut down. If you are experiencing any of these, or I'd say a multitude of these symptoms, some more telling than others, if you sit in this state and don't get treatment, in about 15 minutes, you'll reach that level of 106 degrees Fahrenheit, and you will be in an organ crisis. So if you notice this on your farm, on public, wherever, call 911, get the person into shade, get their feet elevated, get them into a cool bath if you can. That's the like out in the field, and I don't mean that in terms of farm, but I mean just away from healthcare. The number one intervention that you can do is to get someone into submerge them into a cold body of water. That will bring their body temperature down. And then don't give the person any fluids. Mixed reviews on this. I think best practice would be to not give anyone fluids, just because the likelihood of unconsciousness is so high that they can't regulate that they're actually swallowing, and then they can choke, or technically drown. Yeah. The other reason why this is important for farmers is because these are the risk factors for heat illness. And again, the font is small, I apologize, but I mean, just looking at that, how many apply to you? And truly, I mean, I think the two bottom boxes are pretty much all. So you're already higher risk for heat illnesses. Okay, so we talked about the importance of body cooling. Katie, myself, a few of my colleagues, and one of Katie's colleagues, now my colleague, worked on this table here on the left.
We'll also send this out and you guys can.
Yeah, have a hand up too. So if not with us, but so like if this is something that you want at your place of work or on your farm. So the data and recommendations here come from both NIOSH and from the US military. So it's the standards that the military uses, as well as what the regulatory body sees for the recommendations. I'll point out on the far left, so it's the real field temperature. So that's the wet bulb global temperature, not just the air temperature, though it was a 90-degree day, but also what's the humidity, the wind direction, and then the absorptive quality of the machinery around you, the built environment behind you. So it actually can feel warmer than what the air temperature is. So kind of another recommendation, which comes up a little bit on the next, well, I guess it's, yeah, this side. Is that monitoring is has such an important role in preparedness. Planning a cooling tub and then monitoring so that you can actually have that real time, what is the real field temperature in this situation. And so anyways, that's there is like the NIOSH heat toolkit, extreme heat toolkit, and it does offer some of that ability as well, or just at least the plans for that. This is the other major recommendation in building heat tolerance. So if you or someone that's working for you is new to environment, it's appropriate and recommended to follow the 20% rule. So you're either increasing the time exposed, so time outdoors by 20%, or the level of activity by 20%. So not both, and you acclimate over 7 to 14 days. Depending on that level. You don't acclimate both at the time. Yeah, no, I kind of said that already. If you have previous exposure, then it's no more than 50% a day. So it's a truncated version of that, but still not just going full-fledged heavy workloads in 90-degree weather or something that's unfamiliar to you for that season. All right, so the next piece or factor that we're going to talk about is air pollution, and the reason that we talk about that, wildfires, not so much like industrialization in our rural areas, but also nitrogen and fertilizer use for pollution. As well as, again, 2023 being the wildfire year where Minnesota saw unprecedented levels of poor air quality. Okay, so how many of you have seen like the AQI levels? How many of you know what it means?
No.
Kind of, sort of, maybe not really, yeah. It was something, and again, I feel like because it was so, maybe not so unprecedented, but across the state was unprecedented, we were just throwing this information like, okay, here you go, do the thing. And we're like, oh, wait, what's the thing? So the graph on the left breaks this down. So air quality index is the concentration of particulate matter in the atmosphere at that time. And so you can get this from airnow.gov. That's a good resource that covers the US, but you can bring it down to your zip code. And then the different levels indicate the actions that you should take. Notably, at the 51 to 100 level, just the next step down from this is, you don't have to worry, is when you should start limiting time outside, especially if you're a vulnerable population, so someone with respiratory risk. And you should close up your windows, your home in that, and so really secure that off to the outside. That's important for a couple reasons. One, just I think the general knowledge of like that's something to do. Two is HVAC systems, like if you have the appropriate filtration for that. And three, that indoor air quality is also poor, especially in some of the rural populations where we have gas stoves and fireplaces and things like that. And so making sure that you have that proper ventilation in your home. If you seal off your home to the outdoors. I will not go through this, but this is something that I find kind of that like, why do we care about this moment? This is just air pollution and its impacts on some of the body. So the different ways in which, and these are all from studies. So some of the solutions for this are the ways to be prepared. Masking, so your N, R, or P rated masks, and then that's 95 to 100, which just represents the percentage of air particles that it would filter. Hopefully not news, although I know, at least I've seen out in the fields wearing bandanas and things like that. Those aren't appropriate for actually filtering the air and protecting from those smaller particles. And we're really concerned about our, it's PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5, which is small air particles. And the reason we're concerned with those is because they can get further into our lungs, into our alveolar sacs, which then can transfer into our bloodstream. So it's not just like a PM10 would get stuck kind of in this area and it would lead to, if you had like COPD, it would exacerbate that. But anything smaller, it goes deeper into the lungs and then can have some of those long-term effects. So masks, eye protection, there's still, the research isn't necessarily great on this. General consensus is that eye protection is better than no eye protection in terms of the efficacy, or maybe not even efficacy, but the recommendation. There isn't a clear answer of goggles, glasses, or sunglasses, but some sort of eye protection to protect from the drying out of your eyes. And then also, again, that can lead to glaucoma if frequently exposed. Hydration, the more that our airways are hydrated, the more protective factors that we have within our airways, so that it prevents those particles from getting deeper. And then we talked a little bit about air filtration, and the next slide does so too. I won't harp on it too much. I talked about the AQI when it's a greater than 50. MERV 13 plus is kind of the recommended air filter during poor air quality events. However, most HVAC systems aren't actually set to work with MERV 13. It like makes the system work too hard to try to filter air through it because it's so fine. So there are some other options like a HEPA filter or a Corsi Rosenthal box, which is kind of like a DIY. You buy different air filters, you form a cube, put a box fan on top, cardboard on the bottom, and that actually is just as effective and cheaper than a HEPA filter or a HEPA system.
That is slide that you can forward to us.
I can have the resources for it, yeah, absolutely. And then the last is mental health. So kind of this concept that, you know, those that are concerned about climate change, you're not alone. 7 in 10 Americans are concerned about global warming. 27% of Americans are very worried about climate change. The risks with farming, this is probably not a slide that I have to go over with all of you. I'm sure it's things that you know. One of the most demanding jobs, high financial stress, interdependence on the land, long hours manual labor. It's a socially isolating endeavor. Rural populations are also, I'm gonna make sure I say this right, they've been surveyed as some of the most lonely populations, but they're also some of the most connected populations, which is kind of a weird conundrum, but like, still that, we have the highest rates of suicide of any profession, accessibility to healthcare, and then the aging population as well. How do I want to phrase this now? When I showed that graphic and talked about mental health, and mental health always coming last, it's also the last thing on my presentation, which I feel like I don't give it the justice that it deserves. Something that I need to work through. But so this is the last slide, kind of like the what to do. 5 signs to notice and recognize stress on the farm, but how that leads to like mental health crises and episodes. So I can't see that very well either, but it's a change in routine, change in livestock and animals, the appearance of the farm, interaction with the community, whether that's a farmer's market or any events. And then I believe increased violence and accidents is the other way, physical, yeah. So, yeah, so those are kind of the key like identifiers. There are many more. There are resources within Minnesota. We have NAMI, and so they work similar to like an extension style where they're out in the community and they're creating programs for different populations of people that are struggling with this, especially in the agriculture. At least this is the slide that I pulled, the graphic that I pulled as it relates to agriculture. But yeah. So then these are some of those resources.
We'll send this out.
This will be in the slide. We'll make sure to send out the actual handout with the 2 tables that we had, as well as some of the strategies, and then more on the mental health and well-being side as well.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Before we ask you questions, would you like to grab some food?
Until after.
Yeah.
And what are we supposed to do all the time? It's almost
Right.
3.
So isn't it? Okay. Questions? Any more? I know that we asked them as we went along, so may not be additional questions.
Yes, I have a question about, you mentioned nitrogen and air pollution, and that was something that I've heard about before. Can you speak more about that?
Sure. So just the levels of nitrogen in the air, especially around use of fertilization, and then the impacts that has on humans. So like nitrogen in water, we've seen the blue baby syndrome, but it has a lot of neurocognitive impacts. And so similarly, if you have an air quality, then you're just breathing that in, similar concerns with just neurocognitive diseases. So it's best to have protection on during those moments, whether you're doing it directly or, and again, it depends on things like wind direction and all that.
I don't know about blue baby.
Oh, so when was that? I think it was the 50s. So like private wells, some because of agriculture and I shouldn't say just because of it. Well use in rural areas.
Because of the geology of it.
That area, but there was also concern. Yeah, yes, that's a better way to say it. So anyways, there were high concentrations of nitrogen in the water, and then so not treated, infants were ingesting that, and so then they would become cyanotic, lack of oxygen, so they would turn blue. So it's the blue baby syndrome, and it was what led to the Clean Water Act.
And I think in this area, everybody's septic and or water wells are tested on some basis.
Yeah.
One and stuff, but
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
It's not
To be concerned about anymore because of the Clean Water Act, as long as that's service.
Yeah, it's a good way to.
You don't live in air, so. Okay.
And parts of like the state, like southeast Minnesota, much more of a risk, like where there's the karst geography, if you've heard of that, it's very porous. So allows that nitrogen to essentially slip into the groundwater much easier than other parts of the state. So still very blue baby syndrome and reducing nitrogen in groundwater definitely comes up a lot in conversation still in that part of the state.
You gave us a lot to think about.
No, yes, very much.
I already struggle working in the heat. I always have. It's like funny to be a farmer and hate being in heat. But I have over the last 2 years have like really taken different precautions. Like I like almost never have any skin showing. Always wearing hat, sunscreen, whatever. But yeah, over the last like year, I just like really have to work at trying to stay cool. And it's like a really hot day, so it's just like good to remember the signs and think about and all that.
Yeah, put your white shirt in the freezer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like get it wet and then
Have a controller with ice if I.
yeah.
Greatest. Oh, you go.
No, the wrist, they say the
Yeah.
wrist too.
Right. I was gonna say, even if you know, have like a room in your house, even if you don't have air conditioning, or you could just have some fans going and have the shades down that you could pop into and you need a break.
yeah, I've actually just adapted to harvesting really early in the morning. And then like quitting by midday, like in terms of like on my harvest days. And just I'm at increasingly gonna get up earlier and earlier. Which I'd way rather do than work in 100-degree decks or whatever, but yeah, it's something that I plan for and think about.
And considering something like covered in other presentations, we need more time, but one example I'd like to give is there's a farming community in southeast Minnesota, I think maybe more closer to the metro part of that, like Dakota County-ish, that they harvest overnight. Like
Yeah.
they completely change their practice. It's overnight.
Yeah, I would prefer to like harvest in the evening, but really early morning. I mean, it's also just not good for the quality of the flowers, but yeah. I know, I'm just adapting.
And I think that's helpful to kind of wrap up or close with is that this is all can be really overwhelming information to kind of process when it's given to you in an hour like this, but you guys are already doing things to adapt to these changes. So I think that can be something that could be helpful to draw on as you're thinking about making plans for the future as well.
Does this have anything to do with, like you mentioned pest pressure? And what comes to my mind is like my little kids.
Yeah.
And being out in the gardens and stuff would just had to be early in the morning or not late at night because bugs. So are bugs related to this, our pressure of bugs, it seems like.
Do you want to talk about ticks?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you want to go back to
It seems like that's also got me.
facts? Because the one that Katie was talking about was more related to pests of crops.
Sure.
But there is the change in vector ecology and vector habitat. And so we're seeing increases in Lyme disease. West Nile is challenging because of the fluctuations between extreme wet and extreme dry. But that puddling and flooding is what mosquitoes love. And they don't mind the drought as long as they have that. So, and especially like the mosquito that spreads West Nile breeds really quickly. And so if they have that, anyways. However, I will say there's the caveat, like Lyme disease and that tick is more or less statewide. From southeast all the way up to the northwest corner. West Nile is pretty secluded to like west central and northwest a little bit. As that habitats change, you can kind of expect everything to continue northwest. So the West Nile mosquito likely won't, it will stay in west central, but it won't come south.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But ticks and other vectors will come up, like tropical ticks, or not ticks, tropical mosquitoes their projections are up this way. And then ticks will continue. We're seeing the Lone Star tick, which was essentially didn't go, I mean, it comes from Texas, didn't go past, I guess I don't know my state saw that well, but like the Mississippi, Kansas, that's already being seen in Minnesota and will continue up in. So, yes, definitely a real concern. And again, kind of that, back to your original question of like, how does this impact? It's, everything all together. Yeah, habitats are changing, both human and ecological habitats are changing.
It's also so pervasive too, you know, heat and smoke. They're hard to get away from unless you have air conditioning with that filters.
Exacerbating the problems that we already have.
Right, right.
I always think about that, like, I can't live without AC in summer. I really can't with this, like, the way we work, it's just like you have to cool down.
You have to.
But yeah, in terms of like the climates, we just didn't have AC. It was like camping.
Yeah, thanks for coming down.
It's information, yeah. So,
We past 7:30. I know, Mary, you wanted to talk a little bit about sowing seeds.
yeah, I was just gonna update on sowing seeds. So Brooke stepped back this year just with planning, because we are still hosting at her farm. So Leah Maxey, I don't know if you guys know her, but she's been at meetings before. She's a member of SFA. She can read nine as well. I think she's pretty good.
She's been at the SFA.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and she has been lovely to work with. She's been great. We just had another planning meeting this last week. We've got, you know, the main stuff all booked. And now we're going to be reaching out to, well, we're figuring out exactly how to handle it, but reaching out to the vendors and focusing on sponsors a lot more. Just trying to be able to grow with them. She is very good with the social media. Yes, so promoting it, because I do not do the social media stuff, and she's happy to take that on, so that's great. But we've got some new ideas this year, trying to make it much more friendly for the vendors as well, and reward them for coming, and then, you know, offering a demonstration, and then trying to just bring in more demonstrations. Do we have a date? Yes, July 13th, Sunday, July 13th.
Sure.
have you set for volunteers to help get everything set either that day or?
We are not yet, we're waiting with early June to do that. And then
What about volunteers to help organize with you?
that was what we decided at the January meeting, was that we were gonna have 2 people do it. I was willing to do it again and work with Leah on it, and then we did decide to pay, what is it, $1,000 to each of us, so like 2 people doing most of the, you know,
Okay,
planning and all the work, and then, you know, once it's a successful completed event. And then, we do have somebody, I don't remember her name, we haven't talked to her in a while. She volunteered to help with something minimal, so I think I'm gonna put her in charge of gathering volunteers and running, you know, duties for that. But yes, help ahead of time, and we're just looking for more chapter involvement to really make this a Minnesota River chapter event.
yeah,
So, yes, it's going good. I'm excited for it again. It's just gonna keep getting bigger. Last year we struggled with the food truck. Yeah, that was so dumb, but stuff like that happens, so. And then the heat.
We talked about food truck yet, but Sleepy Bison.
The truck. We have talked to them before,
And things like that, they're really.
are they in something? Or not, they used to be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's another one might be the Clean Saucer
Oh,
out of
Yeah.
Sherburne.
Yes, and we did check with them and they were booked, otherwise it would have been a great option too. Sleepy Bison, I've honestly personally had not impressed experiences with their food truck. But yes, they are an option. We did explore that at least twice. I don't remember, I think it was the first year, and then it was brought up again this year. So. Yeah, that's the idea, obviously, that we're going after is local. But yeah, that's it. It's,
Isn't there a food truck that comes down here for like, Cinco de Mayo and some of the different Day of the Dead events that are just across the street?
I don't know this area very well.
There's a food truck, we could connect you with the person who.
We are booked now this year.
Okay.
Oh, you did find
I
some.
think Brickstone meets, yeah, last year was difficult. The first year, we didn't go after a food truck until like March, April, and that was way too late.
Yeah.
There's summer supposed to already. And then last year went really well with the food truck on the day of, blew 2 flat tires, had nothing, like no plan, no tires, nothing. And then they got there and it took quite a while to set up. Everybody's hot and what's there, So, hopefully that just does not happen ever again.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's kind of it for sowing seeds. So yes, mark your calendar, Sunday, July 13th. And then, and just on the homesteading series that I'm doing with SFA, I do consultant work with SFA. Right now, I'm working on a series featuring homesteading demonstrations. So it's along the same lines as the sowing seeds. The sowing seeds is like a festival. So like, a day of demonstrations of farming skills, traditions, stuff like that. This year, so this year with SFA, actually, I'm able to focus on homesteading things with the grant that we got. So stuff that I've done before. Herman Barch from, this chapter, he gave a presentation on tapping your maple trees, identifying your maple trees, using stuff from your property. And then Carolyn Hegstrom, she's on the SFA stick board. She gave a presentation lots on gardening and specifically to Minnesota, which was nice because you could, you can listen to anybody talk about gardening, but it doesn't matter. You can't grow. So that was really nice. We've had a lot of interest, which is just really uplifting. It's going, great direction. And then end of May, we've got stuff planned at Brooks House. June at Leah's farm, we have a family milk cow workshop. Managing milk safely at home on your own. And then I'm planning to do podcasts and, just keep going this direction. I'm trying to find somebody to do like a livestock guardian dog training. Something like that. So, yeah. Hopefully see you guys at some of the events. And any ideas, let me know. I'm always up for ideas too. This is something I love, so it's easy for me to come up with ideas. And they've been popular so far, but good, definitely always take more. It's good to know what people are thinking.
Sounds like we need to get, water tanks attached to our gutters. And, yeah.
It was at the SFA conference one year, somebody from Southwest Minnesota was talking about, the pole sheds with the metal roofs, how much water in the truck is condensed off that,
My shed is, 50 long and I'm in sandy soil, so I have a drought every day.
Sure.
And, so it sounds like it's something that I'll have to plan for in the near future, get a 1,000-gallon tank and collect it
overnight.
And granted, I have my own well, but it's a matter of, can I get the water to the back 40?
Yeah.
That's the hard part. So if anyone has any ideas, but
Irrigation connection, there's irrigation, am I correct? Right.
Robert has a pretty wacky irrigation system, and I think it was similar setup to you, so I will also send his contact info and follow up.
Did anybody bring any fast burn questions or issues? Fast burn is when we just ask questions or bring up issues we're having and kind of pool the knowledge in the group.
Things aren't there.
That's good. Yeah.
We were talking earlier, about sponsorships for the Sowing Seeds event too, so if folks had ideas of
Oh, yeah.
companies or organizations that would sponsor. We talked about like local banks and the local thing or. But I'm wondering if people have other ideas of other values aligned businesses. That might sponsor.
Right, like say, co-op, Rome Co-op, they've been good about sponsoring in the past. Ag Water Quality, Minnesota Grown, they've sponsored. First year, we didn't go after sponsorships, we really didn't need them because the grant covered so much of the event. And then the second year, I went after some, I got like 5, and it was $700, that was nice. I just wanna keep building that, so.
So you could check with Drummers Garden Center because, John, Brooke's husband, came out and I teamed up with him and he came and did a fruit tree pruning class. So, I mean, they have every fruit except apricots, but I know John has apricots.
Yeah,
So Drummer sells them and it might be an option.
yeah, I got it written down, thank you. Yeah, I'll keep exploring, and then I'll have an update when we get together in June.
Our last scheduled date for this year is June 12th at the Pizza Farm, Pleasant Grove Pizza Farm. You want to say anything more about that, Sabri?
No, I think otherwise just show up, eat some pizza, hang out.
It's more of a celebration than a meeting now.
That's the last one.
Been looking
Just
for
for the year, yeah.
Seventeen.
The country clubs.
Yeah.
So is there one between now and June 12th?
No.
Oh, 3 a year.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we don't meet in the growing season, so June is more of a social event, and food, so everybody's gotta eat, right? And then, we'll start again in probably October. Yeah, then we meet October through, usually, it was supposed to be March, but you know, then trampled by turtles came.
Yeah.
That's what everybody was gonna do, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. There's lots of food. Please take some food home with you because we don't want to waste